All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm Sam.
I'm Dennis. This week, we bring you finally
much anticipated.
Yeah. Finally, our interview, our conversation with Dean Georgaris.
Yes. So excited to be able to share this with everyone. I think one of the things that I said to him towards the end of our interview is I felt like this provided a sense of validation, and not just for us, not just for Fate's Wide Wheel, but for, our listeners and for everyone who is a part of this community and this fandom, to have him talk to us about the myriad of topics that we addressed. I feel like it really adds to that engagement and connectivity with, from the show with the fans in a way that frankly, I don't know that, we've really seen yet. And I'm really excited to be able to kind of share this. And I feel like in some ways, this is almost just the beginning. Like, we just scratched the surface. There's so much more that we hope to get the chance to talk to him about in the future. I think there's a good chance of that happening. So,
Sure.
But yeah, I'm excited for people to hear this and looking forward to what the feedback is and the response to this, because I think it's a really cool step in a lot of ways, not just for us, but genuinely for the community.
Absolutely. I'm going to be honest, Sam. It's a little bit of personal validation for me.
Oh,
being a huge fan of Quantum Leap since I was 12 years old. And I say it towards the end of the interview, right? Being a huge fan of Quantum Leap since I was 12 years old, and getting to interview the executive producer of the new series, or one of the executive producers of the new series. It's a little bit of personal validation for me. So I will
absolutely
take that. But yes, it was very fun. It was very illuminating having this conversation. With Dean.
And
today.
look, Dean is incredibly professional. He's done this before. You know what I mean? He's done interviews. He knows what it's like to talk to people. And I feel like he's just so eloquent, and he, is clearly very passionate about the work in general. But I love the fact that this is someone who is familiar with Quantum Leap before he came to the show, had seen the series as a whole, had been a fan of it in his own words, not necessarily a super fan to the degree that other people that he's engaged with and talked with since becoming a part of the show. But I love the fact that through the course of this interview, you can just feel his passion with this project and with the people that are involved in the project. And you get the sense that it is a very special group. The cast, the writers, the other producers, and that's so exciting. And we get the chance to, to talk a little bit about all of that, right? Talking about Martin Garrow, talking about Deborah Pratt, talking about Raymond and Caitlin and Ernie and Nenrissa and Mason, getting a little bit of everything through the course of this. And it was just so affirming. There were times when I just couldn't help but grin. Not because of necessarily what he was saying, but how he was saying it. And it just made me so excited for when the show comes back on January 2nd.
Yes, I'm really excited for the second half of the season. A couple things we should catch up. If you do not follow us on Twitter, if you consume our content in other ways, Dean Georgaris, he is probably the most vocal producer on Twitter talking about the show. He's pretty engaged. Sure. That's where we started really having our communication back and forth. So that's in case you like I said, you don't follow us on Twitter. That's where we came to know Dean, through the back and forth on Twitter. Then it involved in this interview that we are having here. I think it's also worth noting. I think a lot of people are going to ask, and we asked some questions in our Discord before. Some questions to ask Dean. We did not talk about this beforehand, but I think we both kind of knew that during the interview, it was not fair to ask about Scott Bakula or Sam coming back.
Yeah.
Because especially with the announcement of the second season just coming, I'm sure that may have intensified conversations a little bit behind the scenes. And like I said, we did not even talk about this, but I think we both sensed that it would not be fair to ask that question, because it would put him into an awkward situation of what he could say.
Right. Yeah, and we don't, I think kind of piggybacking on that, we don't ask a lot about what's coming next. We don't talk a lot about, we certainly touch on things that might be coming in the back half of the season. We certainly touch on season 2 in some ways. And he was very informative about, I think, some of the ideas that they might have, not specific plot ideas, but just about the things that they want to do with the series as a whole in very general terms. But it definitely would not have been fair to try to, quarter him with questions that would obviously be spoilery in any way.
Sure.
I think that in some way, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to really talk about that I almost wanted to ask him is that sometimes there have been things that have come out that have indeed spoiled moments in the episodes, whether that's Ernie talking about Beth, or
Sure.
whether that's the production photos that get released by NBC prior to an episode that show things that are obviously pretty spoilerific. So we didn't want to do that. We were really interested just kind of in the tone behind the scenes. We were really interested in the way that they make this show. And I felt like Dean did a wonderful job of kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of the production and how the episodes work from not just a producer standpoint, but from a writer's standpoint, the division of labor, if you will, the relationship between, himself and Martin Garrow, and, some of the little things that came out about the actors and some of the behind the scenes. So it's just beautiful. I'm so excited. I don't want to talk anymore. I want to get people to the interview as soon as possible. So Dennis,
absolutely.
You do your thing, my friend.
Do your thing. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to thank our patrons. I'm going to give you jump back and give you a brief bio of Dean Georgaris again, if you're not familiar with him, and then we're going to go into our interview. So we want to thank our patrons who support us, who help us keep the lights on here at Project Quantum Leap. Al's Place, Sleep Fan Site, Bourbon and Board Games, Carolyn, Cosplay Dad, Joanne Bartlett, Dana Bius, Rich Bourque, Kevin Butcher, Carol Davis, Deckslower, Dermot Devlin, Barry Donovan, Brian Dreadful, Troy Evers, Larry Ganni, Jason Geis, Michelle Hoffman, Amy Holtcamp, Bess A. Korey, Lady Eternal, Robb Nunn, Oddly Specific with Audra, Christopher Redmon, Adrian Saul, Karen Saxon, Mike Stoufer, Heather Strbiak, Damon Sugamelli, Larry Trujillo, Stuart Williams, Jill Wilson, our anonymous donors, and a special shout out to Jessica Conger and Betsy Freimeyer, our spouses who provide vital childcare while we record the podcast. And I don't know about Jessica, but I know Betsy pulled a lot of duty today while we recorded with Dean. If you would like to become a supporter, a couple different ways. If you want to do so monthly, you can go through patreon.com/fateswidewheel, or a one-time donation, buymeacoffee.com/fateswidewheel. All of that information is in our show notes. Another way you can support us is just leave us a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to our podcast, and throw us some feedback at fateswidewheelpodcast@gmail.com. So that being said, here's Dean. Dean Georgaris is a producer and screenwriter. He is, of course, an executive producer on Quantum Leap. His other credits include, but are not limited to, Paycheck, The Manchurian Candidate, The Brave, The Baker and the Beauty, and he was the creator of NBC's Bluff City. Without further ado, here's our interview with Dean Georgaris. All right, Dean, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. It's something that we've wanted to do for a while now, and finally all the stars aligned and we're able to get together.
Yeah, thank goodness for the holiday break.
I'm glad you're feeling better too. I know you were under the weather for a while.
Yeah, one of the things is, when you're in production, if you get even a little cold, it's just hard to kick it because it's, you're working 7 days a week most of the time, and you got to keep the train rolling.
What is your schedule like these days? Obviously I know you're kind of on a little bit of a break now, but when you're in production, what does your schedule look like?
It varies week to week, but generally if you're a showrunner of a network show that's in production, if you're a lone showrunner, which in this case I'm not, thank goodness, it's such a luxury to work with Martin, but you're looking at anywhere between 14 to 18-hour days. Some days it's 7 days a week. Some days you get a day and a half off. there's just, you're juggling three principal areas of responsibility: creating the new material, filming the current material, and editing the already shot material. And all three of those are going simultaneously. So often what will happen is you might have a snag in one area and that requires extra focus for that area. And there goes your half day on Sunday. You know what I mean? You have to do a little more editing than you expected, or visual effects are a little more challenging than you thought. And then that's sort of where your time cushion goes. But again, in this case, it's, to be getting to work with Martin, I have a little more breathing room than I otherwise would.
How does that division of responsibility work right now? Is it, you both kind of working on the same episodes, or do you split episodes?
It's funny. When I came on, it was pretty early in the season, and it was pretty early in the process. And Martin and I actually hadn't really known each other. I'd certainly known of him and had a tremendous amount of respect for him, but he was really one of the draws for me to work on this. Was I had sort of seen what he was doing with the material and how he was shaping it, and that got me really excited. And at first, it was kind of all hands on deck. We were both putting out whatever fire needed to be put out at that moment. Then sort of we built up a little bit of a rhythm with the writer's room. We were able to kind of start to get ahead. And in that case, we would split it up sometimes by episode. Most of the time Martin does the editing because he's just such a wizard in post-production. It's funny, the first episode we did together was the third episode. It was the first one that I was fully a part of. And I remember, as a showrunner and creator, I'm used to doing all the editing on my shows myself. And so I'm writing out all the notes as I watch the cut. And, you generate probably about 8 or 9 pages of notes just because you have, lots of little things. Oh, change this shot. Oh, a little longer here. What if we try that? And then I went to sort of share them with Martin, and I'd seen that he had already done basically that down page by page. I think we had almost the exact same notes. And frankly, he had sort of more sophisticated or more efficient ways of accomplishing a bunch of them. And I remember at that point thinking, oh, this is going to be a great partnership.
That's really cool. I imagine when you can, not only have that kind of sync with someone, but also be learning some new tricks along the way, that it makes the whole process better, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you sort of find over time when you work in this business is the greatest opportunity is to work with people who you think are both talented and happen to be really good people. And, a lot of times there are people who are super talented who you work with who are challenging. And then other times there are really nice people, but you just feel like they can't quite get you to the finish line. But in the case of Quantum, it's not an exaggeration to say every writer, every person on the crew, the cast, all the way up to Martin, are just lovely, talented people. I mean, I feel incredibly fortunate that way. Those opportunities don't come along very often, and I've learned to really enjoy them, because you're happy for them. You're happy for your cast that they're getting recognition for doing great work. You're happy for the writers when people are starting to know the writers' names and sort of singling out their episode as excellent, and and then you're happy for all the way up to happy for Deborah, who's fought for years to get this show sort of new life. And I've never thought of it as a remake. I know Martin never thought of it as a remake. I think actually take a giant step back. You imagine there could be a whole universe of Quantum Leaps just based on the technology itself, right? Like there could be. You could do 15 different kinds of Quantum Leap shows.
Right.
And I think Deborah's always known that. And, having her, she's on set almost every day, having her around and sort of having her as a touchstone, that's kind of the icing on the cake.
That's so cool to hear. It's something that I feel like, for me personally, I've really only come to realize recently. As much as I love the show, I always just saw it as this lone, 5-season entity from the early 90s. And after, some of Deborah's comments, it became clear to me, it's like, oh, maybe this is true. Maybe this could be, more. And speaking of, the original series, the classic series, whatever we want to call it, what was your familiarity with the show coming onto the project?
I had seen every episode in the course of being a television viewer. I certainly wouldn't describe myself as a super fan now that I've seen the super fans that are out there.
Sure.
But I had a profound appreciation for what it did, and I had some really strong impressions of things it had done, not the least of which were, take on social issues at a time when that was sort of new to TV. I think I was so conscious of the fact that with Scott and Dean, you had two sort of blazing talents and a kind of chemistry that you would be foolish to try to duplicate, in my opinion. It would do a disservice to the original show. It would do a disservice to those performers. You know what I mean? It's like they already played that symphony, and they played it so beautifully that I think when I came on board, I made a conscious decision not to go back and watch episode by episode again and become super fan all over again. Because one, we had plenty of those people already on the staff, and two, we had Deborah, and I think one of the things you try to bring is a fresh perspective. You try to be that, like, what about this? Or, hey, is this a limitation void? You try to look at it fresh. But it's on the short list of shows that made a profound impression, along with Star Trek and Star Trek Next Generation and A-Team and some of those shows that just left, I'll just always smile when I think of them. Every Steven Bochco show, especially NYPD Blue. I think of first season of that show as kind of, I hold that up as good as it can get. The first few seasons, actually, I should say.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because, the term like golden age of TV gets thrown around a lot, especially over the past decade. And I think that, if you really just take the time to look back anytime over the past, 60, 70 years, you can find exemplary, shows in the medium. And it's not just restricted to this past decade, although we have been very lucky for some of the quality that we've gotten. You mentioned the writer's room, and I'm curious how much of that room was kind of assembled before you came along, and how much, did you help kind of craft what's there now? Because we've obviously really enjoyed the writing, and I think that, seeing some of the writers on social media and some of the interactions that we've been fortunate enough to have, they just have such a deep love for what they're doing, which goes back to what you were saying earlier about having good people working. So I'm just kind of curious as to what went into the makeup of the writer's room.
Yeah, when I came on, the writer's room was the writer's room, and we made an addition late in the first season run of adding Alex Berger, who's a very senior level writer who's worked with Martin before. But, I wasn't brought in to sort of make any changes. There weren't any changes necessary. The room, the only thing really was to try to help keep the show moving forward and finding its footing. Because frankly, anyone who tells you that a TV show knows exactly what it is before episode one, especially like a big ensemble production like Quantum Leap, like, shows find themselves. You find yourselves, you see what the actors are great at doing. You see what the audience responds to. You see what the audience doesn't respond to. In this case, there were a lot of new pieces in this version. There was a present day story. There was a mythology. There was a love story between our hologram and our leaper. These were all new pieces. Which pieces were going to work? Which pieces were going to not just work for an audience, but work for you as creators? That's a process that takes, in my opinion, several episodes. And I think in most cases, if you watch TV series, you'll find by episodes 3 or 4 is when people start nodding their head and saying, like, yeah. And that's nothing to do with who started the show or who took over the show. It just has to do with the natural process of the show finding itself.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think that it's something that we've talked about and we've certainly seen. I think episodes 3 and 4 in particular are ones where a lot of people were, like you say, nodding their heads. I'm curious about, and I certainly want to get to the premiere episode, but episode 2, it's so strange. At this point, episode 2 feels like such an outlier amongst those first 8 episodes, and not in a bad way. There was a lot that I really enjoyed about it. And I'm curious as to, you know, your thoughts on that, and if you can maybe explain why it might feel so different.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I came on, the Now pilot had been written and was just finished being filmed. So, you know, what became the pilot. And episode 2 was just starting filming, so it was up on the stages. And you know, when you look at episode 2, there are a couple of things about it that we may have repeated it. You know, sometimes it's a bit of a blur. Plus, I'm 6 episodes ahead of where the audience is. But so episode 2 is a case where he leapt into someone who their own life is in danger, and generally, quantum leap shows tend to be he leaps into someone who is close to someone else whose life needs an assist. So that means like episode 3, episode 4, episode 5, it's an entire town that needs it, right? Like episode 6, it's a woman and her son. So I think one of the first things about episode 2 is he's leaping into the person who died, which is right there is different. It's also, you know, it's one of only a few, I think we may have done one since, where you're in this sort of very regimented military setting and you're dealing with power dynamics as opposed to, and I mean, I think what Martin and the writers did was they found a way to infuse emotion into that by making it a sort of mentor-mentee relationship. But, you know, the situation itself, there was just more plot sort of natural in that episode than there are sort of big plot moves like I'm going to die. No, we're all going to die. No, we're all going to die because of this way. We're all going to die because of that way. You know, it's a little bit more that way. And I think that's probably why it may feel slightly different. I mean, I remember I thought it turned out really well. And I remember watching it and thinking, oh, this one is different for these reasons. It has these, I don't want to say limitations, but different kinds of challenges. You know, every episode has its own column of pluses and then its column of little challenges you have to overcome. And sometimes you do it more successfully than others.
One of the things that, you know, some fans have certainly talked about with that particular episode was the character of Samantha Stratton, you being kind of the Easter egg back to the original premiere episode. Can you tell us, if you can't, I understand, but can you tell us why that character was included?
I actually can't, because that was that decision to include her was made before me. But I suspected it was an Easter egg. I mean, and you know, like,
I felt I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I was going to say I felt like I saw Stephen Lillian. He put a tweet out that I kind of took from that idea was his baby.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, I think I think, you know, one of the things that everyone who works on the show kind of every now and then we find our own little, hey, wouldn't that be a nice Easter egg? Hey, wouldn't that be a fun little callback? You know, I think some obviously built in from the structure, right? Like from original conception of this version of the show, Ernie Hudson was always going to be magic, right? It was always going to be that character, and that character's backstory was going to be something that you knew you were going to find out at a certain point. And I think, you know, in this case, in Moira's episode 4, comes out so beautifully.
Absolutely. So, you know, some of those things, obviously, the Easter eggs and the things that have carried over, there are obviously some things that haven't. And I know that there would certainly be people out there that would shake their fists and say, why didn't you ask this? So some of the things that are different, and we'll get into specifics in a second. Why not just take everything wholesale from the original series and transplant it into this one?
You know, I can only speculate in that, I'm going to give credit to Steven and Brian for, the big moves of this series, Addison, the whole notion of a present, right? It's all their construction. But, in looking at it, I think the first decision you make is, are you going to have present day stories or not, right? Are you going to see the mechanism behind these leaps, or are you just going to do what they did in the original, which is keep it leaper centric? And so once you make the decision to include present day stories, now the minute you do that, you have to create a justification for present day stories, and you want to have to create some kind of connective tissue between them. So in this case, I think a very clever construction of, well, wait a minute, why did Ben leap in the first place? Like, we don't know, he doesn't remember. And so now you have a present day team working to solve the same mystery that your leaper is trying to solve. And suddenly you have a serialized piece of storytelling. And I will say serialized storytelling has become just really important. It's become something that viewers expect, even in their episodic TV. They want to be rewarded for being viewers who don't miss an episode. They, it started before Lost, but Lost, I think, is a great example where it's like,
of course,
people just want to give me a clue, give me another clue. And so, once you make the decision to open up present day storytelling, which gives you a much easier avenue to serialization, then you have to look at, okay, well, what things maybe get in the way of that? And I know I've heard a lot of talk about the waiting room and can we feature the waiting room, or why not feature the waiting room? And I honestly think it's nothing. I wouldn't even rule it out potentially down the line, as the show sort of continually can reinvent itself.
Yeah.
But there's also there's a simple bandwidth issue to the stories that we're telling. There's so many, in the case of network TV, it's a little over 42 minutes out of the hour that you're telling the story. And, in this case, you already know you're telling a leap story and some kind of HQ story. And so now you're down to, let's say, 25 minutes and 15 minutes, or 30 minutes and 12 minutes. And it just felt like to chop it up any smaller would just be to gain points of view, but to lose the impact of the storytelling. I think our most successful episodes have probably been the ones where the interaction between the headquarters and the leap itself have either felt the most seamless or felt the most thematically unified, and we've done that, I think, some more successfully than others. But if, I would say to anyone, if you look back on 8 episodes that have aired, are there any where you're thinking to yourself, well, boy, I sure wouldn't have minded seeing another 6 minutes of a different point of view instead of 6 minutes of storytelling? You know what I mean? So I think that's the simplest way to put it is, you're constantly making choices of how to tell the best version of this story. And in this case, how to tell the best version of a serialized mystery of why did our character do this? On top of a love story, on top of a leap of the week story. You're keeping an eye on all, and so, for example, you want variety on your leaps. You don't want 3 leaps in a row to be all about rescuing a group of kids. So you're also following that metric. Are our leaps different week to week? Does it feel like, okay, well, we gave you prize fighting in 3, now we're going to give you bounty hunter in LA in 4. Oh, now we're going to give you Western in episode 5. And in fact, one of the first days I was on the show, we were looking at the sort of the plan of leaps. Then we knew the 3rd leap was the boxing one. That was the one we were working on creatively. We had the script for the bounty hunter, was done. The first draft was done, and the writers had actually done a lot of work on what would have been a courtroom drama for the 5th episode. And Martin called me and said that he's like, I just was over in the western town in the back lot, and I just have this instinct that we want to see as many different worlds as practicable in the first basket of episodes, because you really want to show the audience, what this show can be. And I remember saying, among the million things I trust in terms of Martin is his instinct for how to put a show together in a way that showcases what the show can be. It's really exceptional. And so when he was like, I just heard it and I was like, courtroom drama versus 1800s Western. And in my mind, I literally was just imagining the audience member sitting here watching this season on Quantum Leap. And I realized, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Like, let's get to that sooner rather than later. Let's get it right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the fact too that, go ahead, Dennis.
I was going to say, to that end, to talk about like introducing things sooner. I know that when Martin came on board, one of his things, like he wanted to introduce Richard Martinez, Leaper X, another Leaper, earlier in the process than what some other writers had thought was a good idea. Can you speak to a little bit about what those conversations were like?
I think the conversations, are kind of, they're pretty simple. They're basically saying, okay, what do you gain by doing it, and what do you potentially lose? And the thing you're always worried about in terms of losing is, are we going to get too complicated or too confusing, or are we going to step on a story that hasn't played out yet? What you're going to gain is holy smokes factor. I use a different word, but family-friendly podcast. Right?
Sure.
You gain the surprise. You gain the lean in. And so I think in the case of when to introduce Richard Martinez, a lot of it revolved, as we talked about, well, what's the pace we want to do the Addison, Ben remembers Addison? And, something I remember, I think it was, I heard Vince Gilligan saying this once on a podcast about Breaking Bad, which is one of those pieces of writing that I just hold up really, high on the sort of Mount Rushmore pieces of writing. And that, that was a show where you kept thinking, oh, well, they're going to play this out for 5 episodes. And then they wouldn't even, over the commercial break, they would immediately get into it. And so I think the love story and the first piece of the love story, which is when will Ben remember Addison, was one of those things that it took a couple of episodes of writing it to really get a feel for, okay, how long do we want to play this out? How long until he says, I remember you? There's a version of storytelling where you could write 10, 12 episodes before he remembers her. And now if you make that choice, then you have to build in stakes about the fact that he doesn't remember her. And that's why stakes were planted in that second episode in case we needed to extend it. Like, well, what if he's been programmed by someone else? What if he's what if it's bad if he remembers, right? Like you put that in there because you might need it. But as we watched it, and as, I think as we talked about it as a group, we all kind of collectively felt that by the end of episode 4, felt like a really nice time for him to remember Addison. And once that was done, the notion of you spend an episode with them where they're reconnecting, and this is our new world order. Like they're back in love, or they can talk, and then just as you're getting comfortable, what if at the end of that episode, someone says, I know who you are, Dr. Benson. And it's like, whoa. And so I think ultimately where to do it revealed itself. And we actually, as a room, had gone back and forth. We had done a version where Leaper X revealed himself at the end of 4. and then the love story solved at the end of 5, and which now, if I say it, you would be scratching your heads, and you would say, well, why would you have thought of it that way? Well, I'd just say, like, for a beat, we thought of it that way, and then we all sort of took a step back and we were like, no, flip it. Like, the bounty hunter story also was just a much better place to naturally have him remember, since it was all about, like, engagement, proposal, love, and people not being who they say they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that, for me, that line from, going from him remembering Addison to then the reveal of Leaper X, and then, of course, to What a Disaster, where it's almost like you have to just shift focus completely and take a step back from all of that. It worked really well to me. And then I think, honestly, in some ways, the big payoff to that was then you've got O Ye of Little Faith, where they're apart. And so there can't really be any kind of, momentum made on that. And I really loved the separate storylines, the present day storyline and the Leap storyline and O Ye of Little Faith. Talking about switching things up a bit, the decision, again, fairly early in the series to have Ben be solo for a whole Leap, in essence. How much of that was just, necessity of the story that you were telling, and how much of that was a conscious decision to say, we need to get them apart for a while to really examine the nature of their relationship to one another?
It was one of those, I won't say it was a happy accident, but it was a very natural sort of outgrowth of, the first thing that happened is we realized we have a Halloween episode on Halloween. And so at that point, Martin and I are thinking, we're at preliminary discussions before we even talking about it with the room, where we're saying, okay, that's going to be our Scream. That's going to be our Haunted Mansion. We're going to take advantage of the fact that we're a Halloween show on Halloween, and let's put him in a scary circumstance. And then the next thing that almost naturally flows out of your mouth when you say is, well, let's put him somewhere really scary and creepy, is, and now let's remove his lifeline. Like if Addison is the equivalent of your phone a friend, or your, like, get a second opinion. Addison is a real safety net. And especially in an episode where you're going to be like, is this a demon or isn't this a demon? Like, one of the things that makes those stories work is you don't get an easy answer to that question. And so it was very natural to want to pull Addison out for that reason. Like the story is just not nearly as scary if he has a partner there to talk about it with.
Right.
And then what was nice was then you realize, well, wait a minute. Okay, well, what Addison story are we going to tell there? What are we going to even be thinking about in terms of Addison? And it's like, oh, well, we can talk about, like, the fact that she isn't there for him right now, and like she might lose him. It's we I think in 3 we flirted with the sort of the exhaustion of being Addison, and I think it was something I thought Caitlin and Ray, they both just did such a great job in that episode of, like, I have to be here for you every minute of every day. Like and so in 7, it's like, well, we mentioned before that that's important to you to be here all the time. Well, in 7, we're going to take that away. And in a way, if you will, it's like he's going through a horror story, which is a demon, and she's going through her own sort of horror story, which is one of, like she's frozen out. Like she's literally powerless. And for Addison in particular, that's probably the scariest thing. Of all the things that you could say about Addison as a character, like being powerless, being unable to act in a way to change, is, I think, probably, the worst feeling in the world for her.
Yeah. Well, I think that the show set this wonderful expectation, even in that first episode when Ben says, "You made me feel safe today," and then again, you kind of up the stakes almost in episode 3 because of what you were talking about with the exhaustion level and her commitment to being there in order to make him feel safe. And then, of course, a few episodes down the road, Leaper X gets revealed. It throws everything into flux, and then a couple episodes after that, she's not even there. And it's easy for us, I think for Dennis and I, to talk about stuff like that as these through lines, these thematic elements that play out over the course of episodes. And I got to ask, how much of that is intentional on your guys' part? Because to me, looking at it, it feels intentional and it works really well. But I also know sometimes it's literally like, hey, we got to get a story out.
We were fortunate that I think there was a natural structure to the first block of episodes in terms of, like I said, in episode 3, you're starting to deal with the humanity of like, okay, if you think about it, the pilot episode, and to be a true pilot, it has to work for people who have no idea what the show is about, right? And so the pilot episode is by nature not going to be one where people are going to get to stop. Our characters are going to get to stop a lot and reflect upon what's happening to them and what does it mean, right? In the case of Ben, he literally doesn't know what's going on. And in the case of the people back at HQ, they have no idea why Ben has done this, and they're scrambling to help him even get through one leap. And I think that momentum plays through episode 2. By the time you get to 3, it just felt right to start. Let's start. These are human beings behaving like human beings, like Addison. Like the best example, I remember sitting there with Drew and we were talking about the leap in, which we knew, was going to be the punch. And then we were talking about, well, where's Addison going to show up? And we just, we're saying things like, well, if I leapt into the body of a boxer, like, I got to be honest, I might do a little funny in the mirror. I admire myself in the mirror. And then you say to yourself, oh, well, if that's happening, wouldn't that be a funny time for Addison to enter? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, but to get back to your question, it's actually it's very intentional. And in terms of, we are looking at it in terms of moving forward in these sort of 3 to 4 episode blocks where things are evolving, characters' feelings are evolving, the story is evolving, and you're challenging the emotions of the characters. So for example, where we left the audience in episode 8, which is an interesting little side story in itself of where specifically we which I'm happy to talk about. But so we leave with this revelation that Ben has leapt to save Addison, whatever that means, right? Like, does it mean save her life? Does it mean save her soul? Does it mean save humanity? He said, I've left to save you. Very intentionally, that's going to shift focus now to the notion of, well, wait a minute, like, you left to save me without telling me, like, giving me no chance to sort of be enfranchised in my own defense. Like, you know what I'm saying? So now we're going to shift to the next portion of the Ben Addison relationship, and frankly, the Ben HQ relationship, which is, well, wait a minute, why don't we know anything? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And like, if you think about it, if the first chunk is really about getting Ben situated and figuring out, is there even a plan here? And they realize, okay, Ben has a plan. And then the second chunk is getting through to that first piece of, okay, well, here are the complications. There's a Leaper X out there, and Ben, and it has something to do with saving Addison, and now, like, then you move into I think the last 3 chunks of season 1, and it will be a complete story, season 1, which starts to, you want answers to some of these more fundamental questions that you've been willing to let slide if you're the characters for a basket of episodes. Like, well, wait a minute, under what circumstances would this have happened? Like what would it take for for Sam for you to leap and not tell Dennis anything. You know what I mean? But I think there are a lot of interesting questions that come from that, though. And
absolutely.
So again, intentionally you explore that, and then you explore. In our case, there's no part of the story that is not open to at least the writer's room talking about playing with, whether it be who leaps with him, or are there limits to the leaps in time? Are there limits to do we want more that is Leaper X good or bad? Could there be 10 Leaper X's? Like, there's no discussion off the table for the room, but you're always putting it back up against what you've done and seeing, yes, that is the natural next chunk to go, or no, we haven't earned that yet, or no, that feels like a sideways pivot that we want to keep moving in this direction instead.
I like that, and going back real quick too to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with, not feeling too beholden to certain elements of the original series, or maybe leaving some things unanswered. I feel like by proceeding the way that you have, like you said, everything's still on the table. Like, even the waiting room is still on the table. You're not just dismissing it, but it's not necessary to the story that you're telling right now. Whereas, all the other stuff that you're talking about, like, those are the types of things that are necessary to the story that you're telling. Dennis, I want to throw this over to you real quick, because I know you have some questions that you've written down. But you go, Dennis. I'm talking.
I mean, I guess, you were just talking, Dean, about like all your different story possibilities. We, on our Discord last night, I asked the question, like, are there any questions that you want us to ask? And I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but you've definitely got a second season now. And I know that the writer's room probably had a number of outs. Like, ideally, you only get one season, but you get to wrap the story up. Now that you know that you definitely have a second season, are there any story tidbits that you can share? Like, this is what we were going to do if we only had one series and out. And now you can tell us that, because you know that that's definitely off the table. And I know that's kind of a curveball question, or I don't know if you can really answer that.
No, it's a fair question. I think, I don't think there's really anything I can sort of reveal, because we're basically going to tell the one season version of the show was, would come full circle, right? You would there would be an answer to why Ben did this, and there would be a resolution to why. Like, that was always what, Martin has said from day one. We didn't want to carry that necessarily into season 2. Like, now the answer in season 1 can create a season 2, but we didn't want it to be this didn't feel to Martin and I like a 5-season mystery. And we didn't necessarily want to be locked into the structure that this particular mystery locks us into, right? Which is the HQ constantly investigating a new tidbit, Ben also investigating a new tidbit, all in service of answering one question. I will say that I'm incredibly excited for season 2. I can't wait. It's hard for me to imagine how long the audience is going to have to wait for the season 2 premiere, but I'm really excited about it, because I think in season 2 what we can really do is unlock just how there's no limit to what you can do with this show. I'll just say that. Like, and so I think
absolutely
what's the best thing about getting season 2 for me, and I think for the room, is we just were really excited about what we could do in season 2. And once you're excited about it, you're like, put me in, coach. I hope we get the chance to take this way. And I've created other shows where I was really excited about season 2s that I didn't get to write. And,
sure.
So in this case, I'm super excited about. I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. I'm super excited about season 1 and how it all comes together. But I'm excited that we get to keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is now knowing that you have that season 2. Did it change? And obviously, I know you can't be specific, but did it change anything about the season finale specifically?
I think if it changes anything about the season finale, we may not need to close off you might not need to answer every question in the season finale. Like, if there's 5 questions, like who did it, why, when, what's the circumstance, and explain it all. I think you can hit 3 or 4 of them and not leave one like a hanging chad that like is unsatisfying. But you can leave one unaddressed that you can always circle back to later. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, whereas if you knew it was really the end of the show, you would probably want to, you probably want to go and explain more than now we have to explain. Right now, like, you can sort of stop it at a certain point.
Right. It doesn't have to be a period anymore, but it also doesn't have to be a dash. It can be an ellipses.
Right. Yeah, and listen, our goal is to satisfy people. Our goal is not to trick anyone or to promise something and then not deliver it. Like, I think the promise was made at the beginning of the season, that he's done this, and at the end of the midpoint of the season, like, you've been given more information about why he's done this. The plan is to finish that story so that we can then go literally leap onto other stories.
I want to hand the baton back to Dennis, but I want to get one follow-up in real quick. And that is, you mentioned earlier about, the original series and the way that they were able to handle social issues. And I know that obviously you guys have touched on some things already in these first 8, but not anything really head on. I know there's an episode coming where you get the opportunity to really do something kind of head on. Is that also one of the things you're excited about with the second season, the freedom to maybe tackle certain issues that you haven't yet been able to really to hit yet?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think, again, there are not many sort of engines on TV, and what I mean by that are show engines, where you have the ability to, no pun intended, but leap from issue to issue and story to story. I mean, we, as you've pointed out, like we can do a horror episode. We can do a Midnight Run episode. We can do episodes about serious issues, and that's an opportunity. As Martin likes to say, those are the episodes that save lives. Now, it sounds maybe a little melodramatic to say that, but I actually don't think it is melodramatic. Like, the opportunity for people to see their story told in a way that they maybe haven't seen their story told before means a tremendous amount to the people who haven't gotten to see their story on network TV. And that is something that this show gets to do. I know, and it's a responsibility that Martin takes very seriously. And I think, as with any show, once you if you can build up a fan base, and if you've got a momentum and you get to keep going, like, then you can stretch, you can push into areas that you don't necessarily push into right away. And so with this franchise, you want as many episodes as possible, frankly, because there's an infinite number of stories you can tell.
Yeah. And I will say, no spoilers, but from what little we have been able to see of the episode that I mentioned, it is absolutely handled in a way that I think your comments are right on, that it's the type of thing that gives people an opportunity to see themselves in a way that they've not necessarily seen themselves, and tells the story really, really beautifully, I think. So, yeah. All right, Dennis, it's all you.
Oh, for sure. No, yeah, I find that all exciting. But to jump back to like one particular episode from this first half of the season, I think episode 6, What a Disaster. It's one of my favorite episodes just because of the circumstances that the new finished episode, like it was created in. Like you kind of had Frankenleap, I think is one of our colleagues as they put it. You had to Frankenstein a new story together, taking elements of the original pilot episode in a new story. Can you talk a little bit about like what the conversations were, like what that process were, like how much of the original do you use, and how do you incorporate this, not just continuing story, but the huge reveal of Leaper X and before?
So I think, if memory serves, it ended up being the finished episode 6 is about a 50-50 split with original footage shot for original pilot and new footage shot. And if anything, there's more new footage in it than existing footage from the pilot. And, and part of this goes back to, pilot episodes are hard to do. They'll just start, and I can say that like I didn't have to work on either of the pilots of this show. So and I think in the first version of the pilot, a storytelling choice that makes complete sense to me as a writer was made, whereby you start in the leap. So now you're with a person who has no idea who he is, and you then, all of the information about who you are comes after. And as a writer, makes complete sense to me. I think when you film it, and when the director's directing it, it leads to a certain tone of performance, right? It leads to a certain relationship between the audience and the character. The audience knows nothing about Ben, so they don't know what he, as opposed to the pilot that we ended up going with, where the audience knows quite a bit about Ben, so they know what he's lost when he doesn't remember. And so I would say the original pilot on paper was incredibly effective, and I think as filmed was fine. It just wasn't as effective as everyone was hoping. And so once the decision was made, and again, I wasn't there for it, but it's not, you don't have to be a sort of forensic writer to piece together, once the decision's made to go with a new pilot, you still have a really beautiful story that the original pilot told, an emotional story between mother and son, and between Ben and Ben's relationship with his mother. Again, things that frankly have a lot more impact as episode 6 than they do in the pilot, because you've spent 5 episodes with Ben now. So when you've spent 5 episodes with Ben, when you hear him call his mom, that's just more impactful than if you see him or hear him call his mom in the first. So I think, forgive me for the fire trucks going by.
Yeah.
So Martin knew, and this was really, episode 6 was really about Martin being Martin. He knew he had this leap story that was still very emotional and frankly on point, and just needed some massaging to reflect the fact that Ben and Addison had been through 5 episodes together.
Sure.
So you had to do some rewriting there. And then you had a whole piece that you had to replace, which was everything related to the mythology and it would just so happen we had just introduced. It was another one of these. There are happy accidents in the process of writing and breaking a season, and one of the happy accidents about revealing Leaper X at the end of 5 was it gave us something very natural for our headquarters characters to be talking about that didn't necessarily need to line up directly with what Ben's going through. And I think one of the, the real magic of that episode, when you go back and watch it and can really appreciate it, is, there's essentially no connection between the HQ and the Leap story, because the Leap story was more or less crafted months ago, and the HQ story was crafted, about a week before it was filmed. But they work really effectively together. And Martin wrote in a few little, connective touches, like, or Jen's like, I'm going to go call my mom. Like, but it was, the Leap story was interesting enough. And then we also had a lot of fun with, okay, how are we going to explain Leaper X? And I think, like, you can, sense of humor is incredibly important to a show like this. I think just because every now and then the circumstance is so absurd, like in terms of like, how are you supposed to deal with this incredibly difficult situation that all you can do is crack a joke. And I think that the whole sort of explanation of Leaper X with little action figures, and that was just great. But I think it was so satisfying, hopefully to everyone involved, Brian, Steven, and Martin, that episode landed as well as it did. I think it's a credit to everybody involved because both pieces worked in such a way that it felt like that was episode 6. It had always meant to be episode 6. Like, you know what I mean? Of course, that's the episode where we would learn about Ben's backstory. Like, right on the heels of him remembering Addison, now we're going to find out that there were parts of him that he kept from Addison. Like, it in hindsight, it looks like it was meant to be there. Which is, again, some of that's a happy accident, and then some of that is you see what you've got, and then you start to figure out how to make it connect.
Sure.
I love, too, that we've gotten this strong sense, and especially with the way that the first half of the season is left on episode 8, of the importance of found family versus, your actual relations. And it's interesting to me that we've gotten all of these tidbits about, our characters, Ben, Addison, Jen in particular, and having difficult relationships with their parents. Magic, of course, gives us the comment about not always being the best father. It's interesting that Ian, we don't really know anything about them at this point. Like, we don't know anything about their background other than that they seem to have a very, very strong relationship with Ben, which I love. How essential is that element in particular going forward into the second half of the season? Because again, with Stand By Ben, we've got these 4 kids that they have kind of formed this family bond in a way that continues on after the Leap.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we get to do in the back half of the season is you get to know all of the characters back at HQ. And frankly, Addison as well. You'll be exposed to their histories, their personal lives, the decisions they make. It will come out of story. In other words, the best way to learn about Ian and what drives them and what their past was like isn't to just stop an episode and let's cut away to Ian and see them at home. It's actually for circumstance to drive Ian to reconnect with, old relationships, or to see Ian with their family. Like, you want the circumstance to drive us into character. That way you can't look away during the character scenes. You know what I mean? You're there. You're in sync with Ian when they're pouring their heart out over whatever they're pouring their heart out over. And so, one of the nice things about having 18 episodes is you get to find the places naturally to tell those stories. And I think going forward, I can think of a couple of episodes in particular, where you're going to learn a great deal more about Ian and what makes them tick, and you're going to be exposed to Addison's past in a way that's, I think, emotional and exciting. And you're going to see more of Jen and more of Magic. And all of that's important because, frankly, everything you do in season 1 is also a prelude for what you can do in season 2. And what I mean by that is, when you think of a season 2, you have several choices. You build on what's already there. You can flip what's already there. So you can take a strength and turn it against you. So, for example, if a character has always been loyal, you can create a circumstance where they're disloyal. But season 2 is built on the season 1 becomes the backstory. right?
Absolutely, sure.
And in this case, you know, by the end of season one, if you feel like you understand all of the characters and you could predict how they all behave and you have a sense of who they are, that just allows us in season two to start to play with those expectations. And that's what I mean when I say it gets infinitely more sort of exciting as storytellers, because now there's just more, you just have more grist for the mill.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, and I think it's only natural to take this opportunity to talk about these, you know, wonderful actors that we get to see every week. Knowing that you came in after this thing had already been cast, you know, honestly, what are your feelings on this group of actors that you have?
I mean, it's, you know, it's always funny when all you want to do is say positive things, because it's people just like, oh, it's spin, whatever. But I have nothing but positive things to say about them. Like, you know, first of all, they're all lovely people. And again, that's not a small thing when you're in production on a television show. So basically you're asking people to work sunrise to, you know, 14-hour days for at least 5 days a week. That's your crew and your cast. You know what I mean? And, you know, that train never stops rolling. So when your cast are professional and on time and lovely and kind to one another and supportive, that sets a tone that helps everyone. You know, even if you're having a bad day and you look up and you see how funny Ray is being, or how sweet Ray is being, or like watching Narissa like and Ernie tease one another, it's like that helps you. That helps you keep going. You know, there are also behind the scenes things that a lot of, you know, people don't think of, because they don't think of what it actually takes to make a network TV show. Like so for example, your cast knowing their lines, so that from the first take you have usable footage. Now, that's no knock on, there are actors who learning lines is challenging. There are people whose process is different. I'm not saying like yay or boo, but I'm saying that, you know, when you have cast who are nailing their performances from the first take, that gives you it gives our directors freedom to try different camera angles. That gives us as writers on the set freedom to, like, well, let's try it a little differently. So it's really, and then of course you just have, you know, the innate talent that they all bring. I mean, I genuinely marvel at what Ray and Caitlin are able to do, given the fact that there is no physical interaction between the two of them, you know, and I think it's obviously there are tons of showcases for how great Ray is in terms of his comic timing, his humor. You know, I mean, he can do anything. I think, you know, sometimes it's easy to overlook the fact that, you know, as an actor, one of the things that you lean on are props and the set and physical environment. Well, Caitlin doesn't have any of those things. Like, she actually has to be performing and doing things like giving us heavy expositional runs in ways that don't necessarily feel like scratch the needle, like stopping for exposition. And, you know, she does, and yet completely believably, right? And completely, you know, I'm always absorbed when she's talking and she's giving information, and that's true of Mason and what they do. I mean, every time Mason's on screen, there is such a magnetic, you know, they have such a magnetic presence, and they, I think, exude this quality that kind of makes you believe things like quantum leap probably do exist. Like, the world really, you know, there's a little run of dialogue. I believe it's in the 9th episode, and I believe it's in the episode. I can't remember whether it made the edit or not, where they just offhandedly say that, there's a comment about whether or not they believe in conspiracy theories, or like are open to it. And Ian says, you know, at at a very young age, they decided that the concept of gender was a construct that wasn't necessarily real, but that like all of the world believed in. So like, yes, like when you, if you tell me that so-and-so might have actually done this, I'm pretty open-minded, you know, and
what a brilliant piece of dialogue in general. Like, that's really great.
I think that dialogue actually was generated by Mason.
Sure.
Memory serves me. I mean, I remember the conversation when we were talking about it. But you know, and then you take someone like Nanrissa, who I just can't get enough of her acerbic wit and her deadpan sort of. But I think there's such a strength in that, you know, such a strength to everything she says and does naturally. And so it just becomes fun as writers, you know, because you have such a vivid sense of how these people are going to sound. It becomes just easier and easier to write for them.
Yeah. It's very apparent, I think, and Nanrissa is a perfect example because I feel like the more that we've learned about Jen and the more we get to see of Jen, the more it's clear that it's just sort of like, oh wow, what a beautiful actor. Like she brings so much to the table, and you know, and I think I mean everything you've said about everyone is so true. It just makes me smile because I really genuinely just love the cast, and I think that they've done wonderful work with everything that they've had, and I mean they're getting great stuff to do as well. But yeah, it's awesome.
There seems to be some magic fairy dust around performers who end up in the show Quantum Leap. What I mean by like, because no, you look back on it, like if you look at all, like Scott has been fantastic on so many things subsequent to Quantum Leap, right? Fantastic on Quantum Leap, but Scott just fantastic, just a very special performer. Dean Stockwell, you'd say no more. You know what I mean? And I think like. I think this cast brings a sense of humanity and humor and a depth of ability that, you know, I think certainly does justice to what Dean and Scott were able to do, you know, or I certainly hope that that's the way that that everyone involved in the original show sees it. I know that's the way that Deborah sees it. You know, I think she feels a real coherence in terms of the quality of the performing and that, you know, that's, you know, I can take zero credit for that, but it's certainly again when you find yourself as a writer in a situation where you have that kind of talent, you push as hard as you can because you sort of know if the episode doesn't work, it's probably your fault.
Sure.
You mentioned the end of Stand by Ben and the way that the episode ends, and I think that you had told us this story, and which I love, and I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about the interaction between Raymond, the director, yourself, and how the end of that episode came to be.
So, you know, in terms of how the sausage is made, like we knew fairly early on, that episode 8 was going to be the mid-season finale. And even before we knew we had a back order, we kind of knew if we did have a back order, it would probably be 18 episodes because of the NBC's schedule. And so we were like, okay, this is a mid-season finale. So we knew we needed something. We wanted something, you know, like a moment, a reveal that would make you want to come back for more. And would at least feel like it was also somewhat answering the question at the beginning of the season. Like, again, I think it's very important to Martin and I that, and the room, to be clear, that we don't make promises that we can't keep. You know what I mean? Like every now and then that'll happen, but you really want to try to, you know, make a promise you keep it. So it was pretty early on, even before we knew what the Leap story was, we knew that the revelation was going to be that he remembered why he left. And originally, as we wrote it and as the room broke it was, we were going to end it with him remembering why he left. And that was going to be the end of the episode. It wasn't going to be, I remember why I left to save you. It was actually, I remember why I left. And so and that's the way it was actually filmed. And then Raymond either texted or called Martin and I. And I should say, our another luxury with these actors are they have great instincts, and if something's not working, they'll let us know. But at the same time, they're not constantly calling the writers' room and asking for changes. Like they're very, they're incredibly, like, in fact, the actors have really give the writers' room a real boost. I think the writers feel like the actors are excited by the material, and I love that. I love, when the actors come up and say, "Oh, who wrote this one? Oh, I love them." That's such a great feeling.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Raymond said that he didn't feel like he had nailed the performance of "I Remember Why I Left," and we quickly looked at the footage because day 3 you're filming the episode, 3 or 4, and what became apparent when we looked at the footage was, oh, he's going to say "I remember why I leapt," and then there's going to be like the white light, and is someone going to say if I were asked, I'd be like, "Why'd you leave? Why'd you leave?" So we realized he needs to actually say why he left, because otherwise and we'll never know, because obviously the world has seen it the way it is. But I think it would have felt really potentially manipulative if he just said, "I remember why I leapt." So in that case, Raymond and Caitlin, I think, sensed that something wasn't working about the scene. And then when we looked at it, it was sort of the aha moment of, oh yeah, and by the way, there was also that you have the thought, well, are we getting rid of our cliffhanger if we say he leapt to save Addison? And it's like, no, that's its own cliffhanger. Like, that's, what does that even mean? And so that's, thank goodness that Raymond felt like he didn't nail that particular moment, because otherwise we wouldn't have had the option, frankly, in editorial. We probably would have gone back and reshot it, is my guess, because like I said, once you see it and you realize he doesn't say why, that really, you can't unsee that. You scream at the TV.
So, that leads me to just a quick follow-up. We know that there's stuff that, might not have made the cut or might have been shot a little bit differently, and certainly with the original pilot episode. Is there any chance that we might get to see any of these sort of deleted scenes or cut scenes or alternate scenes?
I genuinely don't know. Because I don't know. It used to be, there'll be a Blu-ray and we can put it all on the Blu-ray. We've talked with Peacock about, frankly, having just additional material, showing another a scene or a take on Peacock when the things, but everything. At this point, everything, there's a financial consideration behind everything. Literally anything you do now, like that's someone it's time you have to pay for. And I think, honestly, the good news is we have the stuff. It's not going anywhere. It's just a question of finding the right outlet for it. And there are episodes where, Ye of Little Faith, the director's cut came in at 50 minutes, I think, or it's like, so that's an episode where, or maybe it was 45, 50. Point is, that episode came in much longer than what you saw. Now, when I see the finished product, I think the finished product is great. Like, I don't miss what we took out, but what we took out was really good. It just was, we just didn't have room for all of it. There are other episodes where, pretty much everything we filmed is on the screen. And part of that is just because, we have 8 days to film an episode. That doesn't change whether the episode be all in one location which is relatively easy to control and you can get a lot of filming done, or if you're marching all over the mountains, like they did in Stand By Ben, it's like that's actually to film that in the same number of days as you're filming, sort of a different episode can be, the logistics can be very challenging. That's, and that's another one of these things about a network TV show that's different than streaming content. Like our sandbox that we have to play in is very set. Like we don't have the flexibility that these other platforms do. And that's not a complaint. It's just a fact, part of the challenge and part of the fun of a show like Quantum Leap is figuring out how much you can do staying in that sandbox. Like, you can want to do a Battle of the Bastards and it's like, okay, well, how do we, and we've, there are a couple episodes in the back half of this season, one in particular, that's massive in scale compared to most of our episodes. And then that's a case where we found another half day and we did a lot of prep work. And we'll see, by the way, if it works. We'll see how big we can make a Quantum Leap episode feel. Conversely, I think some of our most successful episodes are ones that are really self-contained. I think Ye of Little Faith was self-contained. There's an episode coming up called Leap, Die, Repeat that I think is going to be a fan favorite. That's quite self-contained, but just for it.
Yeah. Do you ever, we talked obviously about the core cast. With the nature of Quantum Leap, do you ever have a guest actor come on and they're just so phenomenal? And how bittersweet is it to be like, well, we'll probably never get to work with them again?
I think we've been very fortunate so far that our guest cast has really delivered. And I forgive me for not being able to remember most of their names. It's not for lack of wanting to. It's just you've got so much going through your mind.
Sure.
And you've got like so much going through your mind about we're filming episode 15 right now. So it's like I'm thinking about the guest cast of 14, 15 and casting 16,
right.
But I think it's more we're a show where we have the opportunity to give guest actors, I think, some meatier roles than say a lot of other shows. I think it was a happy accident of circumstance and timing that Justin and Sophia came on board for the Bounty Hunter episode. That was literally like the universe just like lined up for that. But what was great about it was I think it set the stage or sort of showed guest cast that, hey, like you can come do an episode of Quantum Leap and it can be additive to you. Do you know what I mean? Because, with bigger stars, one of the things they're constantly managing, they have representatives and they want to make sure everything they do is strategically correct and it expands their brand and it doesn't feel like a step sideways or whatever. And I think, to get Justin to come on off of the biggest show of the last decade, and by the way, right before he went to do his pilot for a show that's now going to go to series on CBS, it's like for him to stop in with Sophia and be like, well, we're just going to have a blast doing this Bounty Hunter episode. That's something that the show is able to do. And we've just been fortunate that the community is actually willing to step up and step into these roles, whether they be big names that people are familiar with, or whether they be, actors who are, who like the brothers in the boxing episode, like just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Acting. And I shouldn't really even try to single out an episode. Like you go from the, when we were coming up with the idea for Stand By Ben, and it was really kind of inspired by films like The Goonies and Sandlot and Stand By Me, those actors need to be strong or the episode can only be so strong, like so you're kind of counting on, and we have a fantastic casting department that finds these performers. I mean, I remember thinking to myself when those auditions came in, like, fingers crossed, like that we're gonna find our Stacy and Roy. We're gonna find them, and then and then there we did. So.
Yeah. One of the things I read an interview with Justin, and I really loved the fact that he, it was his first thing after This Is Us, and that he purposely decided to take, this role, this show. And I just thought, like, how cool is that? Here's a show that it's only 4 episodes in, and this is something that he wants to do. And I felt like, in a way, it was kind of this interesting stamp of approval on the people involved, on the, on the show itself. And, because he's a very, charismatic performer, and he's got this, long list of credits over the past, like, 15 years or so that I think put him in people's consciousness in multiple genres, whether it's like going back to something like Smallville, or it is This Is Us, or whatever. And so I just thought that was a really cool get for the show, and I loved that he was enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, and then, look, it was, like I said, that episode was already in existence, and we were sort of fine-tuning the script when he sort of became a possible guest cast. And I remember saying to Martin, hey, it turns out Justin Hartley is a fan of Quantum Leap and might want to do an episode. We should think of something for Justin. And Martin, there's just sort of this pause on the phone, and he's like, you mean like the episode that we're currently working on, where with the charismatic bounty hunter who's proposed to his fiance and she hasn't said yes? And I was like, oh yeah, that's why you get the big bucks, Martin. You're right.
Yeah. Which, by the way, because of that episode, I am going back and watching This Is Us for the very first time now, and going through my own personal devastation from that series. And it's weird now. Like, now I have to remember, it's like, oh, I discovered Justin through Quantum Leap, because he is just, and that entire show is just phenomenal.
We want to move to wrap up, and I want to hand things over to Dennis here in a second. But before I do, you've mentioned and alluded to the impact that Deborah Pratt has had in her presence. And I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't just kind of ask about her level of involvement, and even further than that, what it means to have her specifically as involved, and the fact that she is showing up to the set so often, that she is so supportive, because for a lot of fans, ourselves included, she has really been the torchbearer, for the past nearly 30 years of a show that's not been on the air. And we're so excited that she's going to be even more involved, directing an episode, for instance. And I would just love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a unique resource, and it's another one of these little luxury items that you just don't normally get in a series. You don't, especially not a reboot, or in this case, like I said, I prefer to think of this as just a different chapter of Quantum Leap's stories. First of all, Deborah's tried just about everything you can try in terms of dramatically episodes on the Quantum Leap. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, this woman, like, they're not too many. You don't go to her and say, hey, what about this? And she says, gee, I've never thought of that. Like, it's much more, it's like having, Gandalf or Dumbledore or someone there. And experience. Like, she knows what's worked in the past. She knows what hasn't worked. At the same time, she's never taken the position of, I told you so, or you should listen to me. Like, she encourages us to push the boundaries. She supports anytime we're trying to sort of expand or into area that maybe she didn't get to expand, which is unique, a lot, like, because it would be very easy for her to view this as her baby, and then to basically be defending it from any evolution. Sure. And that'd be very natural, frankly. But instead, she's sort of like the premise itself. She's very open, and she's very like, well, let's go with that, or yes, what about that? And then also constantly reminding us, to have faith in the characters, have faith in the characters telling the character story part of this, like trusting that the audience will be moved by, it doesn't always need to be a space shuttle. Space shuttle, great, but it can be a family restaurant fighting for survival, can be a Quantum Leap episode 2. We talk a lot about what's a Quantum Leap episode. One of the things you learn in season 1 of the show is what's an easy episode, what's not an easy episode. And invariably on a show, there are things you think, well, that's for sure a Quantum Leap episode, that when you then try to break it, you find yourself going, well, it's not working. And then there are other episodes that you don't think at first. You're like, well, is that big enough? Do we need to put more fireworks and more bells and whistles? And then it's like, no, you don't. You just need more heart. So, and by the way, she's there almost every day. Like she's this fountain of energy. She is incredible. Everything about her is youthful. Like it's hard to. You're like, wait, she. Everything about her gestalt is decades younger than she actually is, but she has the experience of someone who's been working at it for so long. I think we're all really proud to say that she, after 99 episodes of the Mothership, like she's directing an episode of this first season, seeing her name on the slate next to the word director, that was very meaningful, I think, for all of us.
I adore her. That's awesome. Maybe one day we'll get to talk to her too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had, so I had written down some other questions on our Discord, but I think you pretty much addressed them all for the most part. And I think wrapping up on Deborah is a great way to wrap up this episode and bring it full circle. But I just want to say, I know I haven't spoken as much with you behind the scenes as Sam had, but I just say thank you so much for coming on the show. I am one of those geeky super fans that has been in love with Quantum Leap since I was 11 years old. So getting a chance to talk with you, Dean, has just been just a highlight of this entire series coming back experience.
My pleasure. It's like I said, it's a privilege to get to work on the show. I mean, like it really, I felt that way when I came on board, and I just feel that way more every week. And I think that's why we're all so excited to have earned that second season. It's not easy to do nowadays, no matter, I think frankly, it takes the power of a title like Quantum Leap. It takes a lot to get an audience to tune in, or to get an audience to stick with you. And like, the fact is, we have a season 2 because of the audience. And so thanks to all of you. And our hope is not just to keep entertaining you, but to surprise you, and to surprise you in the rest of season 1, and then and surprise you in season 2. And as both Martin and Deborah constantly talk about, like, to just push on what do you think is the limit of what we can do in this show, and like, well, what if we go a little further here? What if we go a little further there? You know what I mean? And I think that's what Steven and Brian did so beautifully in the sort of the reconception of this second show, by adding the love story, adding the present day. I know there are people who may not love all those choices, but I think it's a great stepping stone to expand the kind of storytelling you can do, and I'm just excited to do more of it, and keep delivering the show.
Thank you so much, Dean.
Of course.
We love the show so much, and I love so much about what it represents, so much about the possibilities. I think I told you this a few weeks ago that, to me, what the show can do, as you said earlier, is pretty much without limits. So I love hearing that. I love hearing your passion for it. And I love hearing the stories about the other people you get to work with. That puts a smile on my face. You've certainly put a smile, I'm sure, on our listeners and viewers' faces. And it really does provide kind of almost a sense of validation, I think, for the fandom to have you come on, our little Two Tired Dads show and talk about, Quantum Leap and be so open and engaging with us and with this community. It really does. It does mean a lot, and we appreciate it. And on behalf of our listeners, thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure. So hope you enjoy the rest of season 1.
I'm sure we will. There's a laundry list of questions we didn't get to ask, so I'm going to have to beg you to come back on sometime.
We could record part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Would love that. All right. Thanks so much, Dane. Appreciate it.
Of course. No problem.
Cool.
Man, I loved that.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that we got to do that. It was so fantastic to have him on. That sense of validation that you were talking about earlier, it really is pretty wide ranging. The idea that we started this podcast 5 years ago talking about a show that had been off the air for 25 years. We both had grown up as fans of this show. I mean, literally grown up as fans of this show, started watching it, when we were like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And to now be sitting here in our 40s and have had the opportunity to interview one of the showrunners of this iteration of Quantum Leap, and to have gotten, in my opinion, a very open and engaging conversation with someone who's clearly passionate about not only the work that he does, but this specific show. I don't want to say it made, all the work that we've done prior worthwhile, because I feel like just the work itself has been worthwhile. I've loved every moment of doing this podcast and talking with the people that we've had the opportunity to talk with. But it certainly felt, it kind of felt like that nod, that idea, like, you're doing all right. Like just
the Robert
keep
Redford
doing
meme,
what you're doing, yeah. So yeah, from that perspective, it was very kind of him, very generous of him to spend some time with us today, especially when we could have been watching the World Cup final. But
I tell you what,
it was really wonderful.
You and Dean were into it, and before we hit record, like, you two were commiserating over that. And me, it's like, I love other sports. I just, like, that is not on my radar whatsoever. And I was like, sure. Yeah. Go sports. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, should we talk about what we're going to do next week? Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, thank you again so much, Dean. So next week, we had talked about we were going to do a revisit of Stand By Ben, to go along with our interview with Eric Lee Hoffman, who played Sullivan in that episode. But discussing it off mic and re-listening to that episode, like, I think we pretty much summed up our thoughts on Stand By Ben. Great, solid episode. So what are we doing next week, Sam?
Well, let me just add real quick. I think that, in full disclosure, we initially have felt like maybe we missed the mark in our conversation about Stand By Ben. And it's one of those dangers, I feel like, because we watch the episode, and sometimes only once, and then we dive into our recording so that we can get it out in time for that post-show drop. And I think there was a little bit of concern of like, did we not get this right? Were we too harsh on this point? Did we do this? Did we do that? And ultimately, based off the feedback that we got from, quite frankly, from Dean, as well as from our listeners, it was sort of like, speaking of validation, it was sort of like, no, we did all right with that. I think we said what we wanted to say, and it came off well. So that said, one of the things that we had wanted to do, and we'd really hoped to have the opportunity, honestly, to do it before now, but now presents the perfect time is to talk about the first half of the season, just do kind of a general overview in brief. This isn't going to be any sort of deep dive. And then to also name, because everybody loves lists, especially this time of year, to name our top 3 episodes of the season thus far for ourselves. Personally, we'll each give kind of our top 3 and see where we land. And then, of course, we want to hear what other people think as well. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a fun way to kind of wrap up the year and prepare ourselves for the premiere, the winter premiere of season 1, the second half of season 1 on January 2nd, which of course we'll be back with our our normal episodes, screener access willing, so I'm looking forward to the chance to kind of revisit some of the ideas and the themes that we've been presented with thus far. And that's obviously something that we talked about in the interview with Dean, is some of the themes and plot elements that they've inserted, and being able to kind of now step back and look at those 8 episodes as one thing, as opposed to like individual episodes that we're watching week in and week out. So I think that'll be kind of cool to do.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And speaking of, episode 9 is at least currently titled Fellow Travelers. It's going to take place in 1979. Yes. Someone, I don't know if you saw this one, Sam, on Twitter, someone pointed out like Fellow Travelers. It kind of has a similar motif with a certain song from the original series. And someone thought, wouldn't it be interesting if they did a cover of that song in that episode? And let me tell you something about validation.
Right.
When we named this podcast Fate's Wide Wheel, we knew we were doing a deep cut for even fans of the show. If they were to end up covering Fate's Wide Wheel, they're not going to do it. They're not. Please don't do it. There'd be a horrible idea. No, don't do it. No. But if they did do it, speaking of validation, that'd be pretty sweet.
Oh,
yeah.
Icing on the proverbial cake, without a doubt.
Don't do it. Do it. No.
Do it. Yeah.
Well,
one last thing that I want to say, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to, going back to earlier about our patrons and our donors, just, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so very, very much. It means a lot. And it feels like a gift week in and week out. And in this particular time of year where so many people are, of course, exchanging gifts, we really truly appreciate that gift, because it helps us a lot, and we're already experimenting with new things, new pieces of technology that we can use to make the podcast better. But of course, even more importantly, this time of year, if you are thinking of donating, we would always ask that first you look to your community, you look to what you can give to the charities that need it most right here and right now, the people in your community that need it most. And then if after that, there's a few coins jingling around in your pocket and you want to throw them our way, by all means, we will certainly accept them, and we will do everything we can to put them to good use. And we genuinely mean that. It's not a spiel. It's not a pitch. It's just, it really, to me, it feels like the right thing to do, because we're very fortunate and very privileged to be in the position that we've been in for the past 5 years, to get in your ears and talk to you. And if one of the things that we can do is to encourage people to, give back to their community and take care of those that might not have all the things that we do, we'd certainly like to try to play our part in maybe setting some things right that once went wrong. So thank you all so much for your support. Thank you for everything that you have done that has gotten us to this point. And we do kind of feel like this is a milestone for us to be able to interview somebody like Dean and have him on the show, and build those relationships going forward to hopefully bring you even more stuff like this in the future. And we'll see what 2023 brings, because it's right around the corner. We do have one more episode before the new year falls, but it kind of just, it feels like we're sort of like beginning a new chapter in a lot of ways with an episode like this. And we just want to thank everyone who supported us through the years, including, as Dennis mentioned earlier, our lovely wives, Jessica and Betsy, because without them, we wouldn't have this.
Absolutely. Well, with that, you want to take us out with your catchphrase? I don't like doing catchphrase.
Oh, I appreciate that. So I will just say in closing, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, stay safe out there, and remember to always leap responsibly.
Happy holidays, y'all.